Hi, my name is Tori Cooper, and I'm the Director of Community Engagement for the Transgender Justice Initiative at the Human Rights Campaign. Today, we'd like to invite you to have a wonderful conversation with two brilliant activists, Renae Taylor and also Yasmyne Hunter. Renae, if you'd come on camera and join us. We're going to talk a bit about World AIDS Day and the HIV epidemic in trans communities, but first, we're going to talk to Renae, and then Yasmyne's going to join us shortly. Renae, tell everybody a little bit about who you are, what you do, and where you do it.
Hey y'all, I'm Renae Taylor. I'm located in the Memphis area. I am a 46, soon to be a 47-year-old non-binary trans person here in the South. I am the program director of Transcend Memphis, which is an initiative under the Relationship Unleashed nonprofit. And we do work around trans and non-binary people located here in the South, and especially here in Memphis.
Awesome. I'm a fan of the glasses too, and I'm also a fan of Unleashed magazine. So thank you for all you do.
Thank you.
How about I read a little bit about, and this comes from verywellhealth.com. Going to read a little bit about the history of World AIDS Day, and then we're going to talk about what it means to you, Renae, and then also to the trans community in your area, okay?
Okay.
Great. So World AIDS Day was first observed on December 1st, 1988 to bring greater awareness to HIV, as well as to commemorate those affected by the disease. Today, it is regarded as the longest running disease awareness initiative of its kind in the history of public health. Since the early years, the epidemic has changed enormously, and so too has the global agenda. With about 38 million people worldwide who have HIV, universal testing is the main key to halting the number of new infections. Testing will identify all those who need access to treatment, which will help those with HIV live longer and healthier lives. World AIDS Day was first conceived as a means to capitalize on a media gap that existed between the US presidential elections of 1988 and Christmas. James Bond, a broadcast journalist who'd recently taken a post at the World Health Organization, was convinced that audiences could be drawn to the story after nearly a year of nonstop campaign coverage. He and his colleague, Thomas Netter, decided that December the 1st was the ideal date and spent the next 16 months designing and implementing the inaugural event. From 1996, World AIDS Day operations were taken over by the Joint United Nations Program of HIV/AIDS, which expanded the scope of the project to a year-round prevention and education campaign. And one of the things I'm really, really proud to say is that so many community-based organizations and advocates across the country have really taken World AIDS Day and ran with the message. So tell us, Renae, what is the HIV epidemic like in Memphis?
Here in Memphis, we have 7,200 consumers living with HIV in the greater Memphis area, and we continue to need support and new initiatives to reduce the numbers of HIV/AIDS in our local area.
Wonderful. That's a lot of people. 7,200 is the number that I heard. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Awesome. So what type of services are folks receiving there, and what type of services are they saying that they still need?
I think that housing is always going to be an issue, because if you're housed properly, you can take your medicine, you can eat, and you'll have a secure place to be.
So housing is an important thing. And housing, I think, is really, really important, not just for people who are living with HIV, but it can also be a tool. Adequate, safe, and affordable housing can be really a tool for the prevention of HIV also. I think that's really, really important, and obviously the first thing that you mentioned. So tell me about trans people in Memphis, and particularly trans people who are living with HIV.
We have a population which is predominantly Black trans folks, but we also have other minorities. Like we have we have a Latin population, and uh, some people, not all the trans people here, are affected with by HIV, but it's important to make sure that they know about prevention and harm reduction. While maybe they may practice sex work as a means of survival, to minimize their risk, and also to know about PrEP.
Interesting. Thank you for mentioning PrEP. But also, let's go to first that harm control piece. Because harm reduction, excuse me, could really, really be important. Tell us a little bit about what harm reduction means to you and how it can help people who may be engaged in sex work or survival sex work, which are not necessarily the same thing, but also how it can directly, having a harm reduction approach can really help folks who are living with HIV to live better lives.
When I think of harm reduction, I think of safer sex practices, and also how to be safe and empowered if you have to do sex work, how you can negotiate your dates into using protection to protect your date and yourself. And also, I'm sorry. Um, but that's when I think of harm reduction, I think of safer sex practices, the proper use of a condom, and being empowered enough to negotiate safe sex with a client. That's when I think about harm reduction.
Thank you. And that's really something that folks who are engaged in sex work should know, that there can be a shift in the dynamics of power that I think can really, really happen. One of the awesome things, and we're going to have Yasmyne join us very shortly, but another thing I want folks to think about when we're talking about sex, whether it's with a client, with a friend, with somebody, just to hook up with your boo, whomever it's with, even with when it's with yourself, when there's an imbalance of power and control. And we know trans people, trans and non-binary people often don't hold a lot of power in society. It makes it much more difficult for us to negotiate, which is a word that I heard you use. And when we don't feel empowered to negotiate, then it puts us at greater risk for HIV, for other STDs, and for a lot of other things as well. Puts us at greater risk for violence because we're incapable or don't feel empowered enough to speak up on our own behalf. So thank you for bringing that into the conversation. One of the harm reduction approaches I think that we can, when we talk to folks, is about condom use. If folks aren't going to use condoms, for those of us who participated in sex work, we know that people will offer you much more money to have condomless sex than they will to have sex with a condom. So we can talk about something else you brought into the conversation, PrEP, and whatever PrEP is to them. We know certainly there's the once a day pill that people can take for the prevention of HIV, but there's also studies, and we believe probably in January it's going to be approved, so that folks can actually take a shot once every 2 months of cabotegravir. I believe, I'm not a doctor, but they can take a shot of cabotegravir that can prevent them from getting HIV if they're negative. We also know that access to housing, which you just mentioned, but also access to employment and education and all kinds of other resources are great tools to help people who don't have HIV stay negative. And then for people who do have HIV, Renae, I think something, and you can talk a little bit more about this as well, because I'm going to ask Yasmyne about it later. Tell us what U equals U is, and why is that so important for folks to get the message about U equals U on World AIDS Day?
Absolutely. U equal U means if you are violently suppressed, you cannot transmit HIV to your partner or potential partners. I think that's a great conversation to be had. It takes away that stigma that's attached to someone who is positive, who may abstain from having relationships because they're scared about passing HIV on to their partners. So, your body is not as much as harmful as people may think, and you can have um, a great sex life, be sex positive, and have great sex if that's what it's going to be, as long as you play safe.
So, and by playing it safe, when we're talking about U equals U means undetectable, which means that you have achieved viral suppression and maintained it for 6 consecutive months, means that your HIV is untransmittable, means that you can pass HIV along to your sex partners. People who are living with HIV have been proving U equals U even before it was a thing. So, thank you so much for talking about that. We're actually going to welcome Yasmyne now, who's going to talk a little bit more about where HIV is in the area where she lives and works, and also in the community there. Welcome, Yasmyne.
Good evening. How you got everyone doing?
Wonderful, wonderful. Pleasure to have you. You look great as always.
Same to
So
you.
Renae and I were just talking. Yasmyne, tell everybody who you are, what you do, and where you do it.
I'm Yasmyne Hunter. I'm from Atlanta, Georgia. I'm the executive director of the Lewis Project, where we're helping the youth LGBTQ that's under the age of 25 create sustainability and employment.
Come on with it. We love that sustainability and employment. So, Renae and I were just talking about the history of World AIDS Day, but I also asked Renae if they would tell us a little bit about what HIV looks like in their community. So, where do you live?
I live in Atlanta.
Great. So, tell us about Atlanta. Tell us about HIV in Atlanta, and then more specifically in the trans community in Atlanta.
Okay. HIV used to be like, oh, HIV, HIV. Now HIV has become like the new normal for Atlanta because it's like it's just with the stigma that's tied to it. So many people are uneducated about HIV, and it keeps rapidly growing. But for me and my trans community, it's a thing to try to get much people as possible to stay negative and just because HIV leads to very other other things that may lead to more detrimental things that hurt you.
So, if I may respectfully add to that, untreated HIV or undiagnosed HIV can lead to really negative health outcomes. Because what we know is that people who have HIV, who have an HIV diagnosis, who get into care and get to viral suppression, have a normal life expectancy. That's amazing. That it wasn't the case just a few years ago, but that's stuff that people are now proving simply by taking their medicines. So, one of the
Yes.
reasons why I thought it was so important that we have both Atlanta and Memphis represented, the CDC says that around 50%, a little above 50% of Black trans women who live in the South are going to have an HIV diagnosis in their lifetime. And that's very similar rates as it is for Black MSM. What I find interesting is for those of us who've been doing the work a long time, both Memphis and Atlanta, a lot of us on the ground believe those are two areas where HIV is the rates are even higher than 50%. And there are a number of reasons that go into that, some of which we're not going to get into here. But let's talk about what prevention looks like.
Prevention looks like interventions that teach you safer sex practices, also that give you empowerment. And prevention also looks like treatment as prevention, and treatment also looks like PrEP. And also for prevention for people that are positive looks like treatment as prevention, as well as like staying on your medication and becoming undetectable or virally suppressed, so you don't transmit HIV. And like you said, HIV now is a chronic condition like diabetes and other. So we do have a normal life expectancy.
So, what you talked about is one of my favorite interventions. You referred to TASP, which is an acronym like everything in public health that stands for treatment as prevention. So, tell us a little bit about what TASP is. You hinted at it and we've talked around it, but tell us more about treatment as prevention. and then I'll explain a little bit while we're getting Yasmyne back.
Okay. Task to me is treatment as prevention is taking your medicine, going to getting your CD4s and your viral loads done, and trying to get to undetectable so you can limit your comorbidities that are associated with having HIV or AIDS.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what treatment as prevention means to me.
Okay. I also see, thank you for that. I also see treatment as prevention as making sure that we're addressing those things that in public health we call the social determinants of health, making sure that we're getting adequate housing, making sure that folks have access to affirming health care, mental health if that's what they need, employment services for folks who also want that. It's a whole bunch of things, and not just medicine. And I think those are some of the things that we really need to think about when we're talking about the social determinants of health that we don't always think. So what do you tell us more about some of the services that folks can access there in Memphis?
We have multiple CBOs and community-based organizations like Friends for Life that offer food pantry. They offer EFA. We have Ryan White, and we have these other organizations that all, if one place isn't the fit for you, we have multiple groups that are doing the work to make sure that that's the perfect fit for you. You may not fit one place, but you can fit another place. And we have great organizations doing that work here located in Memphis.
So what is EFA?
Emergency financial assistance. They may can help you with your rent or your light bill when you're in need.
Awesome. That sounds amazing. And I don't know where Yasmyne is, but if she's sitting in her chair, we can probably get her back on the screen. Good. I think she heard me. You can hear me, right, Yasmyne? Shake your head. Awesome. Say something, Yasmyne. Nope. Okay. All right. So we're going to figure this out. Well, correction. I ain't figured nothing out, but Savon's going to figure out because she's a genius. So in the meantime, we're going to continue this conversation. So tell us about, you mentioned that there were some organizations that are doing good work in the greater Memphis area. You can mention some if you'd like. We'd like to give folks a shout out who are doing
Absolutely. We have We Care Tennessee, which is Yasmyne Tasaki. We have the Relationship Unleashed, which is the organization I'm partnered with. We have Friends for Life. We have Sister Reach, which is Black film-led reproductive justice organization here that does great work. So it's not just MSMs, it's not just trans people, it's also Black women who are also affected by HIV and AIDS.
Wonderful. Thank you. And you didn't mention the Tiny House Project and Kayla Gore at my sister's house, but I'll bring them into the conversation because they are like, that's what folks are knowing about trans in Memphis right now. But thank you for mentioning that. So as we continue to talk about trans folks, you identify as non-binary, correct?
That is correct.
Will you explain to folks what that means? Because we see your pronouns as Renae Taylor, they, she, me, which I absolutely love. Tell us a little bit about what it means to you identifying as non-binary.
For me, identifying as non-binary, I always kind of felt as a androgynous type person, a person who wasn't all male, all female, not just particularly knowing that I could be non-binary because of us being raised with a binary system, and particularly me being from the South. For context, I didn't have the language to express myself when I was younger, so I was like, I'm androgynous, I'm just androgynous, and that was the only word then. And then when non-binary came along, that felt like the right fit. I don't feel all male. I don't feel all female. I feel like I'm a blending of the masculine and the feminine.
I love it. I love it. I love it. And what works for you, honey. I appreciate it. So, being a person who identifies as non-binary, we know that also falls underneath the trans umbrella. So, tell us, how does your non-binary identity and how does the identity of other non-binary people, how does that put them at greater risk for HIV?
I think that being under the trans umbrella, that we still, our bodies are highly fetishized, and that our potential partners, they want to experiment, because they was like
maybe you can just hit speakers. Oh.
They imagine being with us, but they don't imagine being in relationships with us, and that is another thing of people not owning their attractions. And it's okay to love a trans person.
Thank you for that, Renae. That was a lot of powerful stuff right there. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the fetishization of our bodies. I can't even say it with a straight face, but how people fetishize us in our trans and non-binary experience. But we also want to hear a little bit more from Yasmyne. So thank you for coming back, Yasmyne. I know we've had some technical issues. But what we're talking about, we want to talk about HIV in the trans community in Atlanta. But what Renae was just sharing with us is that being trans can put you at greater risk for HIV. And I'd like to hear a little bit about what you think about that.
Ooh. With the disparities in being homelessness, the drug abuse, mental, physical abuse, it puts a lot of trans people in greater chances of catching HIV by being ostracized or just by them trying to be themselves.
That's a really good point. So what is it about it? I mean, because I'm trans and I go to the store and I'm buying watermelon doesn't make me at greater risk for HIV. What is it about that, though? What is it about Atlanta and trans people who live in Atlanta, more specifically trans women and trans feminine beings in Atlanta? Why is it that HIV likes to find us?
It's because of these I'm going to say insecure, down low men, and thinking that they can keep a secret and sleep with this girl, that girl, and no one's talking about their sexual health in the beginning of the conversations.
So sexual health, that's a new term that we haven't talked about yet. Tell us a little bit about sexual health. What is sexual health to you?
Sexual health to me is living good and doing the right things, and just being transparent and open about statuses.
Thank you. Status is really, really important. And may I also offer other STDs as well, not just HIV. It's easier to catch herpes than it is to catch HIV. With HIV, there has to be one of 5 fluids. There has to be the vaginal fluid, pre-cum, semen, blood, or breast milk. That's it. It has to come through one of those fluids. Those are the only modes of transmission. And so with herpes, we don't talk about herpes. We don't ask people if they have. Actually, I do. I've asked people if they have herpes, if they've ever been tested for herpes. And the truth is most people haven't. Because if you go and get a health screening, they don't test you for herpes because it's a more expensive test unless you specifically ask for it and pay for it. But the reason I mention other STDs, because HIV is an STD, is because on World AIDS Day, it's important for people to remember that it's been proven that people who have 2 STDs in their lifetimes are more than 50% likely to get HIV in their lifetimes. It's the exact same action that's taking place. You're having sex. All right. And the way that it works is once your body gets an STD, your immune system starts fighting off that STD. And if you enter the HIV virus into the mix, it makes it easier for HIV to get into your system. All right. So that's just something to consider. And so when we talk about sexual health, certainly that means testing for HIV. If you're already a person who has an HIV diagnosis, it means taking care of the best, getting the best possible care that you can. And as much as you can, getting to an undetectable viral load and maintaining that. But sexual health also means we're trans folks. So we were assigned one thing at birth and live differently than what was assigned at birth. As a Black woman, there are things that I'm simply much more prone to. As a Black transgender woman, I not only will I need gyno care, but I still have a prostate. And so at some point, I'm also older than both of you. I'm in my 50s. And so I also need to have prostate exams as well, in addition to mammograms. And part of that is my sexual health, making sure that my prostate is good and healthy, making sure that my breasts, not only do they look good, but that they feel good and they are good also. So thank you for bringing that sexual health piece into the conversation, because that's really, really important on World AIDS Day. So now that I've got both of you here, I'm going to say a word and I want each of you to tell me the first thing that comes to mind, okay? It can be something positive. It could be something negative. You also have the right not to respond, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Great. So the first word I'm going to say is infected. First thing that comes to mind.
Stigma.
Down low men.
Oh, okay. All right. How about the next one? Down low men. First thing that comes to mind.
Disease lover.
Insecure.
Thank you. HIV.
Or normal.
Well, how about this next one? AIDS.
Livable.
Death.
How about this one? Chronic.
Livable.
So I've already heard livable more than once. Really, really interesting there. So what I do, oh, well, here's another one. Transgender.
The new normal.
Valid.
Thank you both. So what we did was, in some ways, we both acknowledged stereotypes, but also defeated some of them simply because of the first word that came to mind. I heard the word stigma. And stigma is interesting because there are a number of different stigmas that can exist, a whole bunch of them. And probably for many folks, particularly trans and non-binary folks, and certainly for people who are living with HIV, the worst kind of stigma that most will ever have to endure is self-stigma. Feeling ashamed of one's diagnosis, that they did something wrong. And I want to make everybody know that whether you have HIV or not, having sex is a normal, wonderful thing when both partners are into it. It's just that simple, you know. So if we get rid of stigma and we reduce self-stigma by making sure, first of all, people understand what HIV is, what it isn't. That people understand what AIDS is and what it isn't. And so a great deal of that is making sure that we're having conversations. We have two folks who are amazing and brilliant people from different parts of the country, but both in the South, who have different lived experiences and yet some quite similar. And what you're doing is you're both, all three of us, we're eradicating stigma by simply providing people other ways to think about their HIV diagnosis. All right. I keep hear you using the term "we" a lot, Renae. Why is that?
When I learned how to modify my language, I try to make it where my language is gender neutral, which would be the same thing that we offer in the medical care. is being gender neutral until we know someone's pronouns, until they object and say, "Oh, I'm a she and a her," or a they and a them. So I just say I modified my language to include gender neutralness.
I like that. I have to incorporate that much more because there is a certain there's a certain thing about folks who identify as non-binary versus those of us who live a very, very binary existence. And just like we talked about earlier, certainly, I think simply because of who we are and how we identify and how we navigate the world, in many ways, it does put us at greater risk for HIV. Not because of how we live the world. I tell people all the time, being trans was easy. That's all I know how to be. Regardless as to how other people saw me, this is always who I was. The problem is the shit we have to put up with from other people. That's the hard stuff.
That's the hard stuff.
That's the hard stuff. And that for trans people and non-binary people, we don't come out once. And if you're a person with it living with HIV, there may even be more than 2 disclosures that you have to endure. All right? So that was actually pretty cool. So Yasmyne, we want to hear a little bit more about you and the work that you're doing. So you work with a number of different organizations. And I also want to talk about interventions. I heard one or both of you mention interventions. So we want to talk about what particular interventions are out there for trans people who are living with HIV. But Yasmyne, we first want to give you a little airtime and talk about the work that you're doing and some of the organizations that you work with.
Okay, great. Right now, I'm in Fort Lauderdale, and I'm attending the Ariana Center 6-year anniversary. I was part of the 2019 team, and it allowed me to advance my grant writing skills so I can help my community in Atlanta. I work with THC, I work with ABC, I work with Positive Impact, S1C, SEX, work with We Care Tennessee, Transcending, Transforming, Lips Tampa. The list goes on and on. I'm a trans consultant, and what I try to do is help navigate my brothers, my sisters, and just help them be a team player, for them to use me for my knowledge or my skills or my leadership to help change the lives and narratives of what that systematically says that trans people won't live to see the age of 34. Baby, I am officially 45, and I'm blessed. This is Trans Awareness Week. And, I'm standing on the shoulders of my brothers and sisters that have laid down the road and laid down their lives because of someone else's insecurities.
Thank you for that. Thank you. Yes. And thank you for that. And I heard you say that you were a consultant. And I like folks to know consultant means that you will work for a coin. That's what you call a pregnant pause. You leave a pause right there, because what I hope folks will also see this and they will listen to you all and want to hire you all. And not just you two, but hire all kinds of folks. Trans folks are subject matter experts in our own lives. Nobody can tell you better about the intersections of womanhood, of personhood, of transhood, of HIV positivehood. Nobody can tell you more about that than a person who has that lived experience. So thank you for that. Looking forward to hearing more about the work that you're doing also. So Renae, you work with Unleashed.
I do.
So tell us a little bit more about Unleashed and the impact that they have on the greater community and not just the trans community, and how World AIDS Day, what type of impact Unleashed is having on World AIDS Day, or vice versa.
Unleashed is primarily they talk about relationships and being a couple, and how do you advance that and make healthy relationships if you're in the LGBTQI spectrum. And we have just started really getting into the HIV education and prevention side of things, and I am the trans initiative program manager, hoping to get some programs under our belt and broader our horizons.
So I'm going to assume that means there's going to be much more input and output around the trans community.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Thank you for what you're doing. We appreciate that, because we need, with greater visibility comes a greater responsibility. And that responsibility is not just for us as trans people to represent ourselves well and make sure that people understand what we need and make sure that we get it, but it also is a greater responsibility to folks who aren't trans. You can't say, if you have folks like us who are talking about the plight of trans people and talking about what HIV looks like in our communities, if we're telling you and you heard this, then you can no longer say you didn't know. And so there's a greater responsibility for you to act. Ally, the word ally is a noun, but it's also a verb. It's not just who you are, but it is what you do. All right. So tell us about your shirt, Renae.
This shirt says, hopefully you can see it. It says, "This is what an HIV advocate looks like."
Mm-hmm.
So I have been positive 23 years. I found out when I was 25 years old. When I found out, a lot of people were still dying, and they didn't know if they were going to be able to live. And I had made promises to myself that if I ever got the diagnosis, that I was going to fight like hell and I was going to live. And I am asymptomatic. I am undetectable, and I'm just getting old with HIV.
That's its own thing. So tell us what asymptomatic and undetectable mean.
Undetectable means that my my level of virus in my system is where it can't be detected, and asymptomatic means I have yet to have symptoms of HIV or HIV progression. So I'm very stable and have been for a very long time.
Wonderful. Thank you. And what do you attribute that to?
Having good friends, a strong support system, and being an advocate, and being able, also giving a voice to those who don't have a voice. And I've always been one of those people that, like, if you tell me no, I'll be like, why? And are you not gonna stop me? Especially when it comes to my health care.
I've heard you say why too, so I believe it because I've seen it. So Yasmyne, we both know a lot of the same people, and we know a lot of people who are living with HIV in Atlanta and beyond. So how should people, if you could give 3 pieces of advice to a person perhaps who is newly diagnosed, to a trans person, a trans woman more specifically, a Black trans woman who lives on the west side of Atlanta, what 3 pieces of advice could you give her? Can't hear you again.
Every time
we got you. Just keep rolling.
Okay.
We can hear you.
Okay, 3 pieces. Own it, living your truth, and know that there's other people that's living with HIV that are your friends, your sister, your friends, your cousins, and your chosen family.
Thank you. May I add one to that, please? Take your medicine. One of the best things, now I'm not a big proponent of a lot of medicine, but one of the best things that any person who has HIV can do is to simply take their medicine as prescribed. You cannot get to an undetectable viral load if you don't take your medicine. Your life expectancy will be cut short if you don't take your medicine. Renae just explained for us that they are asymptomatic in part because they take their medicine. Take your medicine. You don't have to tell everybody your business. If you're still in a place where you don't feel like telling people, don't tell them, but talk to a medical provider. There's help out here. All right. So, Yasmyne and Renae, in our last minutes, we're going to shut it down and then introduce Vanessa, who's going to come on and wrap us up. So, Yasmyne, give us a couple of points so that everyone that's listening understands what HIV and what World AIDS Day is specifically for your community. Give them some good information, something that they can run, as we say in church, run on with.
Okay. It means visibility. It means unity, and it means living stress-free.
Stress-free. Thank you very much, Queen. We appreciate you. Renae. Give us some good stuff.
I'm going to say that what Yasmyne said resonated with me, that it's visibility. It's showing people that HIV is a livable condition, that it doesn't have to be, World AIDS Day doesn't have to be a solemn occasion anymore. It should be a celebration of the ones that are surviving and thriving, and that we can end this epidemic with the right funding, interventions, and encouragement, and getting rid of the stigma of HIV/AIDS.
Thank you. Thank you. And as we bring Vanessa back on to wrap us up, I want everybody to know, every person who's living with HIV, every person is not going to be a loud and proud advocate. Everybody is not going to wear t-shirts and have a tattoo. But it is important that whoever you are, that you're taking the best possible care of yourself, that your advocacy is with the medical provider, making sure that you're advocating for yourself and for your health. We love you, and thank you both for being here today. Take us away, Vanessa.
Thank you, Tori. Thank you, Yasmyne, and thank you, Renae. What an amazing conversation and a fantastic way, I think, to really kick off our summit. Y'all said some things that I was trying to take some notes on. So for those of you watching, if you want to take notes and actually do something and learn about what HRC is doing on our end, please check out our website, which is www.mybodymyhealth.org, to find out how you can get involved and learn more about doing more in your community. Thank you all so much. This was an incredible conversation, and I so look forward to continuing this conversation.